Welcome to the Bible in a Year podcast, a resource from Enter the Bible. Journey with us through the books of the Bible, discovering more about Scripture and how it shapes our lives today. I'm Jenny Wojciechowski.
And I am Katie Langston. Welcome, and today we are delighted to be joined by Professor Kathryn Schifferdecker. You may know her as a frequent host of this podcast, but today we have her joining as a guest. So welcome, Kathryn.
That's
welcome. Thank you.
Kathryn is the professor of Old Testament at Luther Seminary and author of a forthcoming commentary on the Book of Esther, which just so happens to be the book that we will be exploring today in our Bible in a Year podcast. So, yay! That's good.
Yay! That works out.
So fun to be interviewing you today, Kathryn.
Yeah,
Thanks,
kind of fun.
Jenny.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
For our first question, can you give us a summary of the Book of Esther to get us going?
I can try, though it might be a little longer than it should be, but let me dive in. So the Book of Esther is a narrative. It's 9 chapters long plus like 3 verses in chapter 10. So it's what I would call a short story of the Bible. And it's the story of Esther, Queen Esther, who is a Jew, but also the Queen of Persia. And it's basically the story of how she saves her people, the Jewish people, from genocide. And so there's lots of details, and I won't go into all of them, but I would urge people to give it a quick read because it is a pretty quick read.
Mm-hmm.
So it starts with the king of Persia, Ahasuerus, or sometimes translated Xerxes. Ahasuerus is the Hebrew name. And let's say he's not the smartest king in the world. He's fond of gold things and beautiful women, and he gets angry really easily, and he's easily persuaded by the people around him. And he's kind of a buffoon, to be perfectly honest. And so he throws...
Many such cases.
There are many such cases, yes. Let the listener understand. And he throws this lavish party at the beginning of the book, and for 6 months, and all of his army is there and his officials, and that's kind of your first clue that maybe he's not the smartest king in the world, because like drinking with your army officers for 6 months instead of like running your kingdom, maybe not the smartest thing to do.
Sure.
So you did not misspeak. It was a 6-month party.
Yeah, 6 months.
Okay.
Yeah, 6 months. 180 days. Yes, yeah.
Okay.
And then, for good measure, he throws a second banquet, a drinking party, for all the people in the capital city. And that's only a week long, so, whatever.
Well,
and the only rule at the party is there's no limit to the drinking.
Great.
So,
that sounds like a frat house.
It is. Yeah, it does. Yeah, it does. And anyway, at this party, he sends for his queen Vashti, who's a beautiful kind of trophy wife, and he wants her to come to show herself to his guests, and she refuses. She says no, and the text doesn't say why. But the rabbis say, well, the text does say that she should come wearing her crown, and the rabbis say that she should come wearing only her crown, and that's why.
I see.
That's why she refuses.
I think maybe she was just sick of him, but okay. I got you.
Yeah,
I'm picking up what you're putting down, rabbis.
That's right. So she refuses. He doesn't know what to do. He asks his advisors. He's so enraged. And they say, well, this is a catastrophe, right? Because now all the women in the whole land, in all the provinces, for all the officials, this is an actual quote, all of them will, defy their husbands if they hear what Queen Vashti has done. So God forbid that women should say no.
Have their own minds.
Husbands.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
And so you have to banish Queen Vashti and then find someone else who can take her place. And then for good measure, at the very end of that chapter 1, he issues a decree to this effect. And also the decree says, every man shall be the master in his own house. So
he's a real
your
feminist.
eye roll is appropriate, Katie. Yes. So a private affair becomes a public catastrophe. All right, fast forward. Esther is a Jewish orphan raised by her cousin Mordecai. She is beautiful and young, and she, through details I won't go into, becomes the queen. She's gathered into the harem, given a year's spa treatment like all the other young women, spends the night with the king, and he decides that she's the queen. So, kind of a PG-13
version.
part of the story. Yes. Anyway, and then enters the real villain. Like Ahasuerus is a buffoon, but he's not kind of actively malevolent. So the real villain is this guy named Haman, who's the king's second in command, and he wants everybody to bow down to him. And Mordecai, Esther's cousin, won't bow down to him. So he decides not just to kill Mordecai, but all the Jews, just for good measure, all the Jews. And so he comes to the king and just saying something along the lines of, there's a people in your kingdom who don't obey your laws, and it's not good for the king to tolerate them. And so the king, not even curious about which people this is, just says, okay, go ahead. Like, annihilate them.
Whatever you
Women
want.
and children.
Right. Wow.
Annihilate, kill, take all their possessions. Again, the king is a fool. So that decree goes out. Mordecai hears about the decree. He goes to Esther, actually sends a messenger to Esther and says, you have to save your people. She at first protests. Mordecai persuades her. I'll talk when we get to the thing about passages. That's the most famous passage in Esther, but I'll wait to talk about that. She goes to the king. She invites Haman to a banquet. They come. The king says, what do you want, Esther? I'll give you half my kingdom. She says, just come to another banquet. Okay, you and Haman. Haman goes home like puffed up with pride that he was invited to dine with the king and queen. But Mordecai, again, won't bow down to him. He runs into Mordecai. He wants to kill Mordecai right then and there. And so his wife and his friends say, okay, we'll build a stake 75 feet high.
Jeez Louise.
And impale Mordecai on that. Sometimes it's translated as gallows. So either a gallows or a stake.
Yeah, the Persians impaled. That was kind of their execution
Yeah, they did.
method.
They did impale. Yeah. So I think it was a stake. But
Nice.
anyway, that night, the king can't sleep. So some records are read to him. The records happen to tell about a time when Mordecai saved his life. He's like, well, what'd we ever do for Mordecai? And his servants say, nothing, really. So just at that point, Haman comes to the court. He says he's coming into the court basically in the wee hours of the morning to seek the king's permission to kill Mordecai. And the king says, hey, Haman, I'm glad you're here. What would you do for a man who the king wants to honor? And Haman's like, who else could it be? It must be me. And so he says, throw a parade. Have one of your officials, parade around this man on the king's own horse with a crown on the horse's head in the king's own robes. And the king says, that sounds great. Haman, go do that for the Jew Mordecai. Right. And so Haman has to do that for Mordecai. He goes home. He's just down in the dumps. His wife then says something really interesting. His wife and his friends say, if Mordecai is a Jew, you will not stand before him. You are destined to fall, which is kind of interesting.
It is.
And sure enough, right then, Esther's servants come to take him to the second dinner. That's where she reveals him for the creep that he is, and he's impaled on the stake that he built for Mordecai. The end of the book then is a second decree is issued that the Jews can defend themselves against their enemies. They kill over 75,000 of their enemies. And then they establish the holiday of Purim, which is named after the lot that was Haman cast to determine the day of their destruction. And they celebrate their deliverance. So there's an old Jewish joke that goes something like, every Jewish holiday can be summed up this way. They tried to kill us. They failed. Let's eat. And it works for Purim. It works for Passover, right? It works for Hanukkah.
Right.
They tried to kill us. They failed. Let's eat.
That's hilarious.
Yeah. Again, I probably spent too much time on that, but that's the story.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. What's a way into this book? I kind of think just reading the whole thing personally, because it is so fun and interesting. It's a good read. But what would you say?
No, that's exactly what I would say. Yeah, it's not like Leviticus or a book of law or even the prophets. Like it's meant to be read from front to back. It's a chronological, actually very well told, well crafted narrative. So I would say just, start at chapter 1 and go through chapter 10. And of course, a study Bible is always helpful, or, my commentary when it gets published or whatever.
Absolutely.
Yes.
A little shameless self-promotion there.
folks. That's right.
But yeah, it's an easy read and definitely readable in one sitting. So that's what I would suggest.
Yeah. Cool.
Kind of related to that, like what kind of book is it?
Yeah, there's some scholarly discussion of that. It's been labeled certain things a novella, right? Like a short novel, a court tale. That maybe a little more explanation there. So if you think about the book of Daniel, Daniel has a number of these court tales. So it's basically the story of a foreigner, and particularly in this case, a Jewish foreigner in a foreign court. Or I should say, not a Jewish foreigner, but a Jew in a foreign court. So think about stories like, the three men in the fiery furnace, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, right? They're in the king's court. They're serving the king. They're of Babylon, or Daniel in the lion's den. Or,
Joseph.
Well, Joseph in the Egyptian court at the end of Genesis.
Right.
In fact, Esther has a lot of parallels with Joseph, just some word plays and some thematic things. Like, just to cite one example, Joseph has this kind of strange grace or attraction or something, like everywhere he goes, people love him, sometimes to his detriment, right, with Potiphar's wife. But like Potiphar puts him in charge of his whole household. The prison warden puts him in charge of the whole prison. Pharaoh makes him second in command. And Esther, too, seems to have this strange isn't the right word, but like mysterious favor is shown to her. So when she's gathered into the harem, the eunuch in charge of the harem favors her. Like he takes a special liking to her. Obviously, the king takes a special liking to her. But so there's some parallels with the Joseph story. I would also just highlight, so it's a court tale, it's a narrative. I would highlight that it's humorous. Like it's, you guys were laughing as I was telling the story, and that's exactly, I think, the response that the book intends. It is very humorous. Like there's this hyperbole of the 6-month feast or the 75-foot steak or the 1 year, spa treatment. Like the girl soaked in myrrh for 6 months and then in some other oil for another 6 months. Like there's this hyperbole that I think is meant to evoke laughter. And in fact, when Esther is read at Purim, so Purim is still celebrated, of course, every year. And if you guys or those listening to us, if you ever get invited to our Purim Fest, please go. They're just a hoot. It's kind of like it's like a cross between Mardi Gras and Halloween. Like everybody dresses in costume and there's drinking. Like one of the mitzvot, one of the commandments at Purim is, at least according to the rabbis, you're supposed to drink until you can't tell the difference between the names Haman and Mordecai.
That's a lot.
That's quite a bit. That's a lot.
That's quite a bit of drinking.
There's drinking, there's costumes, there's usually a play called a Purim spiel, which retells the story of Esther, but usually with some reference to current events. Like I saw a sign for one that was called Jumanji, but Jew, Jumanji, and so they did a kind of take on the movie combined with the Esther story. So they're a lot of fun. So there's a lot of humor in the book as well, but with a kind of serious undertone of this persecution or this intended persecution and annihilation of the Jews. So we can come back to that too.
Well, it is now time for our favorite part of the episode, which is to play Bible Bingo! Dun, 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 dun. And so this is when, Kathryn, you have supplied us with 5 concepts, words, people, places, historical context, that sort of thing, that would go on your bingo card as you read this book of the Bible, and we're going to kind of go through them in quick succession. So the first one we have is Persia.
Yeah, just to note that the book is set in the Persian Empire, and having some knowledge of what that means is I think helpful. So the Persian Empire was established by Cyrus the Great, who's mentioned a few times in the Bible, including in Isaiah. I should know that 54, something like that. So Cyrus the Great conquers the Babylonian Empire and all the surrounding lands around 539 BC. And the Persian Empire really lasts for about 200 years until Alexander the Great comes along in around 333. That's an easy way to remember it, BC. So about, a little over 200 years. And up to that time, the Persian Empire is the largest empire like the world had ever seen up to that time. Now, obviously, the Roman Empire is larger, but that's later. And so it stretches all the way from Western India to Egypt.
Wow.
So it's larger than the Assyrian Empire. It's larger than the Babylonian Empire. It includes parts of Greece and Turkey. And of course, the land of Israel and those lands surrounding that area. And it's a pretty sophisticated empire for its time period. One thing I love, just a little tidbit about the Persian Empire, they had a really good mail system. And so you could get mail from the emperor to the far reaches of the empire pretty quickly, like in a matter of days, because they had basically like a pony express with stations for horses and riders, and these stations were about as far as a horse could go at full speed, at one time. And so Herodotus, Greek historian, third, 4th century BC? I'm trying to remember, Jenny. You're the historian. But
I don't remember.
You don't know. I want to say 4th.
The BCs are hard for me.
I know. That's not your specialty. 4th or 5th century BC, Herodotus, I think it's 4th century, he writes about the mail system and he says something along the lines of, these messengers, these Persian mail carriers, do not let heat or cold or dark of night stay them from their duties, right? And that quotation from Herodotus becomes the slogan of the U.S. Post Office, which is really fun. Yeah.
That's kind of
wild.
Anyway, so Persia's a large empire, and it's somewhat sophisticated. The other nice thing about Persia, I'll just say this quickly. Unlike the Babylonians and the Assyrians, the Persians didn't exile people. They actually let them be in their homeland not necessarily for humanitarian reasons, though maybe partly that, but they wanted people loyal to them at the edges of the empire. And they figure if they let them have their own place, then they would be loyal to the Persian Empire. Anyway.
Cool. Next, you have humor.
Yeah, I probably said enough about that. The Book of Esther is really humorous. And I know sometimes people kind of read all books of the Bible with a very dour kind of not expecting humor. Right. But if you read it, even in the English, not just in the Hebrew, it's pretty funny, right?
It is funny.
Yeah, it really is. And especially, I love the bit where, Haman comes to the court in the middle of the night, and the king doesn't seem bothered that his, second in command is wanting to speak to him in the middle of the night. He's just like, oh, Haman, glad you're here. And Haman saying to himself, well, who else could the king want to honor except me? That's obviously humorous. So,
Yeah.
And sometimes humor is most if you're anti-imperial, right? If you're trying to resist the empire, humor is a very effective way to do that.
Right.
And so
satire
Esther employs that. Yeah.
Satirical.
It's satire, right? Exactly. Yeah. It's late night comedians, skewering Trump or whoever is the president, right? It's humor is an effective tool against the empire. Yeah.
Coincidence.
Yeah, there's just a lot of coincidences in the Book of Esther. So, of all the women in the empire, Esther is the one who's chosen as queen. Of all the nights when the king could have been, experiencing insomnia, it happens to be the night after the first banquet. And of all the records that could have been read to him, it's the one that talks about Mordecai saving his life.
Right.
Of all the people who could have been close by, it's Haman who, there's just a lot of seeming coincidences. So my advisor and mentor, John Levinson, wrote a commentary on Esther years and years ago, really a great commentary. Levinson says the old saw applies here, that coincidence is a miracle in which God prefers to remain anonymous.
That's nice.
Which may be the case here, I think.
I love that. Favor?
Yeah, there's just this kind of mysterious favor that Esther herself experiences with the eunuch in charge of the harem and then the king himself. And in one way, at least, it extends to the Jews as well. It seems odd to say that because they're marked for annihilation by Haman, right? But the thing that Haman's wife says, right, if Mordecai is a Jew, then you will not prevail against him. There seems to be a kind of understanding that Esther herself and her people have a kind of mysterious favor or grace that means that they will not finally be defeated.
And then the last one is Jews.
Yeah, it's a very Jewish book.
Right.
Just in terms of like Martin Luther actually did not like the Book of Esther because he considered it too Jewish, which
that's
probably says more
great.
about Luther than it says about Esther, the Book of Esther, right?
Right, for sure.
But it really is focused on the survival of the Jewish people, both the challenges and the threats that they face, but also their survival, which is, I think, an important thing for us as Christians to keep in mind, that the Jews here are marked by a certain destiny or favor or providence that is kind of mysterious, but there.
I'm excited for this next question because I think you're going to have something good for us. What's something weird or interesting about this book?
So the thing I haven't mentioned yet, that I think one of you did, is that God is never mentioned in the Book of Esther. So of all the books in the Bible, it's the only one where God is never mentioned at all. Now, there's other books where God, doesn't speak or God doesn't appear, like the Book of Ruth, for instance, right? Another book named after a woman in the Old Testament. But like in the Book of Ruth, God is talked about. Like, may the Lord bless you, or may you come for protection under the Lord's wings, or the Lord's name is used in blessing. And Naomi, complains about the Lord, so it's not all blessing, but at least God is mentioned, right?
Right.
And the Song of Songs too, like God is not explicitly mentioned there except once or twice. But in Esther, there seems to be a deliberate effort not to mention God or prayer or anything to do with Israel's history. Just a tiny note about Mordecai being descended from people who came into exile. But at one particular point, I'm thinking about when Mordecai is urging Esther to intercede with the king, she says, all right, I and my handmaids will fast for 3 days, and you fast and tell all the Jews to fast in the city, and then I will go to the king, and if I perish, I perish. And almost every other single time in the Bible, when you mention fasting, you also mention prayer. Right? Fasting and prayer go together.
Right.
No mention of prayer either in Esther. And so, again, it seems to be like a deliberate effort not to mention God.
That's really interesting.
The Book of Esther.
Yeah.
I should say that that's the Hebrew Book of Esther. There's also a Greek version of Esther in the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Bible, where either they're working from a different Hebrew manuscript to translate or they're adding it in. But there are several prayers and visions of God and God speaking to Mordecai and
really?
So on.
So someone was like, well, we don't like that. We don't care for that literary choice.
Exactly. And another weird fact about Esther related to this, at Qumran in the Dead Sea Scrolls, there are copies or at least fragments of every other book in the Old Testament except Esther.
Interesting.
Now that's an argument from silence, right? Like maybe tomorrow a scroll fragment of Esther is going to be found. But I mean, after it's been 80 years since the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered. It seems maybe that the people at Qumran, the Jewish sect at Qumran, probably didn't like the Book of Esther either.
They were pretty
probably
hardcore
for this
out
reason,
there,
right?
They were hardcore out there.
They were hardcore.
Pretty,
yeah. And so a book that doesn't mention God is probably not their favorite. And for this reason, Esther is one of the very last books accepted into the canon by Jews and by Christians. So that's probably the most interesting or weird fact about the Book of Esther.
What memorable verses, chapters, or passages, probably nothing that you're going to maybe cross-stitch on a pillow, perhaps. I don't know. If it doesn't mention God. Actually, you can cross-stitch some of these things on a pillow, but what stands out as really kind of notable passages?
Well, in addition to the story I've told, I think undoubtedly the most famous passage in the Book of Esther, or maybe just the most famous phrase, is this one. So it's in chapter 4, and this is when Mordecai has asked Esther to go to the king, and she said, the king hasn't invited me in a month, and so I could be killed if I came unannounced to the king. And this is what Mordecai says. Do not think that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Jews. For if you keep silence at such a time as this, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another quarter, but you and your father's family will perish. Who knows? perhaps you have come to royal dignity for just such a time as this. So that, particularly that last phrase, such a time as this, is really popular. Like
that's true.
If you were to Google that
cross-stitch that on a pillow.
You could.
I think I've seen that. I think I've seen it.
Well, and there's honestly countless devotional books and Bible studies with that title, for such a time as this.
Right.
Even lately, I've been seeing it. Of course, I'm kind of attuned to it, but I've been seeing it crop up. Like Kamala Harris, and when she was campaigning for president, used that phrase, such a time as this. But also a lot of kind of more evangelical conservative Christians use it to say, we need to stand up like Esther and for such a time as this to save our country. And so it's the best known passage in the Book of Esther. And I think, there are legitimate ways to use that phrase, and certainly using Esther's story as a call to courage or to discipleship. I think that's a perfectly legitimate way of using the story. I think it's always best to know the context of a phrase from the Bible. And if you know the context, that this actually strengthens the significance of this passage, right? Esther says, okay, I'll do it. And if I perish, I perish, right? Like, I don't, it's like Mordecai is calling her to discipleship, to take up her cross, to use that later image. And she accepts, like, she'll do what she needs to do, even if her life is forfeit, which is a beautiful thing. And so that I think it's a significant phrase, in any context, I suppose. But if you know the story, it's even more beautiful. And I'll just say one other thing about that passage. So when Mordecai says, if you keep silence, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another quarter, but you and your father's family will perish. From another quarter or another place becomes a shorthand way of saying God for interpreters, for the rabbis, and then through the centuries. This is kind of one of those places that interpreters, including me, see an oblique reference to God.
Sure.
Even
God is
if
going to
it's
be
not
faithful.
explicit.
If it's not you, God is going to be faithful to
Right.
his promises. And so,
exactly.
Except that then you're in trouble. Right.
Yeah.
You have spent a lot of time with this book. You're wrapping up your commentary now. What is your personal connection with it? Where do you see your story in this book?
Yeah, I think for me, it's just, it's a fun tale, a fun story. And I like the fact there's a strong female protagonist there who ends up being the one who tells Mordecai what to do. She kind of takes charge once Mordecai calls her to her call. So I like that about it. But I think for me, the most important thing here is that whether or not God is mentioned in the Book of Esther, if you take the Greek or the Hebrew version, there seems to be a kind of mysterious providence underlying the whole book. And again, I'll point to, the help and deliverance will arise from another place. And again, Haman's wife and friends saying, look, if Mordecai is of the Jewish people, or you could translate it, since Mordecai is of the Jewish people, you will not stand before him, but you will fall. You will surely fall. Like there seems to be just an understanding that the Jews will survive against all odds. And it just strikes me. I actually preached at a local synagogue a few years back and talked about this.
Oh, wow.
And they seemed to appreciate, the congregation there seemed to appreciate it. I said, look, the Roman Empire is no more. The Persian Empire is no more. The Babylonian Empire is no more. Nazi Germany is no more. But the Jews survive. And that sheer historical fact is enough to make me believe in the faithfulness of God even more, even in addition to everything in the New Testament, right? To Jesus' life, death, and resurrection. Like the sheer historical fact that the Jews survive after so much threat and persecution. And that's that underlying serious tone to all the humor, right? That Haman tried to kill the Jews and was not successful, but lots of other people have followed in Haman's footsteps, including, of course, Hitler. And during the Third Reich, Purim and the Book of Esther really took on new significance for Jews, particularly in Europe. That kind of underlying serious note that there is a constant threat, historically speaking, to the Jews, and yet they survive. I think that's just a really beautiful testimony to God's faithfulness to God's people.
That's really lovely.
So finally, to sum up our question, describe this book in 7 words or less.
Yeah, this is always a challenge. I think I'll go with the opposite happened.
Okay.
3 words. 3.
It's very succinct.
I'll try to explain. So
yeah.
It's actually a quotation from the Book of Esther from chapter 9. This is the NRSV, but it says at the very beginning of chapter 9, "Now in the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, on the 13th day, when the king's command and edict were about to be executed, on the very day when the enemies of the Jews hoped to gain power over them, but which had been changed to a day when the Jews would gain power over their foes, the Jews gathered in their cities throughout the provinces of King Ahasuerus." So that obscures the Hebrew, I think, a little bit. The Hebrew says, on the 12th month, the 13th day, on the very day when the king's command and edict were about to be executed, on the very day when the enemies of the Jews hoped to gain power over them, the opposite happened. Because one thing I skipped over is the day appointed for the destruction of the Jews becomes the day that they defend themselves against their enemies. And that is the day, or the day after that is the celebration of Purim. The opposite happened really kind of sums up the story of the whole book, because it's looking really bad for the Jews, right? When Haman goes to the king and gets this decree against them for total annihilation. And Haman is the second in command, and Esther hasn't had access to the king for several weeks, and things are looking pretty dire. And then the opposite happens. So it's almost like if you were to graph the Book of Esther, you'd have this kind of downward spiral, and then suddenly the turning point, and everything changes, and the opposite happens, right? Haman is impaled on the very stake that he built for Mordecai, and his sons are killed too. And the very day that the Jews were supposed to be annihilated is the day that they defend themselves against their enemies. And instead of the king's 6-month feast at the beginning of the book, the Jews have a feast at the end of the book to celebrate their release from this annihilation and their survival. So it's not particularly theological, but since the book doesn't mention God, it seems to me that I can just use that phrase. I was going to say, through God's mysterious grace, the opposite happened. I think that's 7 words. And
right. That is 7, yes.
That's a legitimate way of talking about the book too. But yeah, since God isn't mentioned, we'll just say the opposite happened. But through a kind of mysterious grace, maybe not God's mysterious grace. If we want to follow the Book of Esther and not being explicit, but through a mysterious grace, the opposite happened, and the Jews survive.
Cool.
So, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, this has been really, really interesting.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much, Kathryn, for just sharing all of your wisdom and knowledge with us and insights on this wonderful book. And thank you to our listeners and viewers. This has been the Year in a Bible podcast from Enter the Bible. Check out more great resources on the Bible at enterthebible.org. And whether you're listening on your favorite podcast app or watching on YouTube, we're so glad you're with us. You can get more great resources like this, conversations, reflections, commentaries, courses, anything that you could need as you dive into the Bible with curiosity and faith. If you have enjoyed this podcast, please rate and review on your favorite podcast app or like and subscribe on YouTube. And of course, the very best compliment you can pay us is to share this podcast with a friend. Until next time.